And a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Schönen guten Morgen. Bon matin, schönen guten Morgen. Yeah. We're a high energy industry in fast dynamic times, and I want that reflected in the audience today because we have a very fascinating and interactive program for you the next couple of days. So bring that energy, no matter how late you were celebrating with us last night. We're going to keep that going. Welcome to Bonn, or back to Bonn, hopefully for most of you, to the 2018 Automotive Logistics Europe Conference. I'm Christopher Ludwig, Content Director of Automotive Logistics, and on behalf of our entire team, it's my pleasure to officially open proceedings this morning. As many of you know, Automotive Logistics has been covering and publishing content for more than 20 years, and this is actually our 16th conference for Europe, for the European market, going back to the first ever event in Montreux, Switzerland, I believe back in 2003. That turned out to be a very good vintage, and I'm pleased to say that the conference has been getting better and better with age. Maybe unlike me, but like most of you. So we're pleased to sort of see the evolution continue, and hopefully many of you, I recognize obviously many of the faces from last night, we're on hand for the latest, say, evolution of this event, which was our first ever Automotive Logistics Europe Awards ceremony, which we held last night here at the Kamea in this room, where we'll have some photos rolling from that for those of you who missed it. We honored 14 winners across categories ranging from global transport management, network design, supply chain resilience, green logistics, packaging, vehicle logistics, service parts logistics, and much more. We chose our 14 winners and 3 highly commended companies from a pool of entrants, which was well over 100, judged by more than 20 expert, independent judges, who some of whom are with us today, and we thank again. It was a fantastic evening. It was a chance to step back and recognize what you do in this sector and how important it is. It's doesn't always get the attention that it deserves, as we often say that, logistics is often noticed when something goes wrong. So last night was definitely an opportunity to celebrate what's certainly going right. I want to thank our judges. As I mentioned, we had more than 20 participating, thanks to our sponsors last night, FedEx, TNT, Jeffco, and Priority Freight. And mostly, I want to thank everyone who actually submitted and participated in the awards. Like I said, we had a great pool of entrants, and there was really a fascinating set of projects. If you go to our website, we have information on all of the finalists, so you can get a brief rundown of what those projects were. We have an article on our homepage today naming all the winners. So take some time to read that, and we can give you more information on those projects. But like I said, it was a great evening. Well done. A round of applause once again to everybody. And I think, the theme of the awards was to recognize excellence and innovation across the sector and to highlight the talent and technology helping the industry to evolve. And these are themes that we're very much picking up now throughout the conference, particularly this morning, but throughout the next 2 days, where we're looking at how digitalization, new processes, and new business models are impacting automotive logistics. Of course, this is also a practical industry. We have factories to run, customers to serve. And so whilst we like to talk about the change which is coming, and some of it is quite fantastic and perhaps theoretical, we're always dealing in the practical as well. So what we'll be discussing throughout the day are like our awards, actually, like the cases. These are actual cases, progress, things that we're seeing actually happening today, whether it's in enterprise management, production, and engineering, all the changes we're seeing from technology and the impacts that they're having on logistics. So like I said, we saw in some of our winners and in some of certainly our finalists, examples of sensor-based asset management, telematics, connected data, algorithm-based network optimization, big data analytics, autonomous industrial equipment. So again, these are all things which are already in the supply chain, or already in operation. And we'll be talking a lot more and hearing a lot more about these sorts of cases. Of course, what we've seen in Europe particularly over the last couple of years, is that despite many challenges, be they regulatory, be they market-related, technological changes, consumer changes, the sector, automotive logistics, continues to progress, has done well, has overcome many challenges. And of course, that's not to say that everything is perfect, or that the industry doesn't face potential or significant disruption and risk, whether that comes from further market shifts, again, regulatory changes, technology, etc. As the title of this morning's session posits, the industry is something of a crossroads. We're standing somewhere between the long-standing, still mainly profitable traditional business model and a future which could look quite different, whether it's through rise of electric vehicles, perhaps a shift in ownership models towards subscription or car sharing, a host of new models. So, still in its infancy, but certainly we're starting to see the impacts of those changes. And of course, maybe at the coalface right now, even the shift away from diesel is impacting some markets and some car makers particularly hard. And of course, this is also having impacts throughout the supply chain. But we're also seeing the opportunities and evolution from that. So again, the rise in the investment which is being poured into electric vehicle production right now, or battery manufacturing. Most of you would have heard the announcement yesterday, for example, Jaguar Land Rover moving a model to Slovakia, but investing in the plant in the UK to build electric models. So much of the press talked about that as something kind of negative, in the sense that maybe jobs going and models going, perhaps a bit sensationalist. We in the press like to do that. But of course, it is also an investment in making that plant viable for the future and to produce the models that the industry is moving towards. So I think, lots of complicated things happening, and we in this room are part of that change and part of supporting that change. Of course, and also despite considerable growth in global, highly interdependent supply chains, something upon which technology like EVs and autonomous vehicles will greatly depend, we're also, of course, facing trading environments within Europe and externally, which are frankly becoming a lot more hostile. So after decades of closer integration, Europe is facing the prospect of new trade barriers and custom rules right within its market, with the example of Brexit. Who knows what will happen from some of the rise of populist and Eurosceptic governments across member states. And certainly on Europe's borders, it's not so simple either, whether it's sanctions with Russia, political tensions with Turkey, the US pulling out of the Iran deal. These are all sort of challenges that the supply chain has to keep rolling with, and it's very difficult to predict. And of course, a looming trade war with the US. We already have tariffs on steel and aluminum. There's threats to put tariffs on cars and parts. Europe retaliation is probably on the way. It's not really good for anybody, clearly, but we have to roll with it. And those in logistics, to an extent, we can try and try and be proactive, but ultimately we have to make the best of what we have. But despite all of these risks and challenges, I think ultimately the opportunities are immense. And again, that's what we're really coming together to talk about. So whether it's digital tools to overcome bureaucratic hurdles, paperwork, digital processes to replace manual ones, or new logistics services to meet the changing consumer demand and changing needs of mobility. So as our upcoming keynote speakers will certainly demonstrate, there's dramatic productivity gains can come from human-robot cooperation, cloud services, advances in artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, and much, much more. So in short, despite all the risks and challenges that I'm highlighting, I really can't think of a more exciting time to be in automotive logistics, to be working in the supply chain, and dealing with some of the excitement and changes which is ahead, which is why, as I mentioned, this is a high energy and dynamic sector, and we're going to reflect that in our sessions this morning and throughout the days. So part of that is going to be reflected in the program that you see over the next 2 days. We've added a lot more interactivity into the program. So as well as main panel sessions happening in this room, like this morning, after this session, we're going to have a number of breakout rooms that you can choose from. So as well as staying here, there's going to be our new ideas labs, Those will take place. It'll be signposted, but there's several rooms just out by the registration desk and to the left of the exhibition area, to a room there. There'll be small workshop groups on things like packaging, finished vehicles, service parts, led by a moderator. It's really a chance for ideation. We're going to have some output from those, so you can move between those, come back in here, take advantage of the options we're there, because it's going to be quite an interesting set. And tomorrow we'll also continue with even smaller think tanks, giving you a chance to talk in small groups, and again share that output with the wider audience. Finally, we can't talk about digitalization in the supply chain without digital tools of our own here at the conference. So many of you hopefully have already downloaded or will have now the opportunity to download our conference app. So you would have received an email this morning on your registration with a link. We'll get a slide up in a moment to remind you where to find it. You can go into the App Store or wherever you get your apps. Here you have. That's actually our live information. So if we can have the other slide, please, when we get a moment, just about the app, because it's much easier. You download the app. You can search for Automotive Logistics or Ultima Media, and there you'll find our app, and you could choose this event. You have the opportunity to communicate with your fellow delegates, obviously see the program details. There's a question area where you can pose questions to the panel if you don't want to put up your hand and raise it. Our moderators, myself, Louis, whoever's on stage, will address the question to the panel. So do take an opportunity to do that. And actually, we're also going to have some live polling. Those of you who have been to our event before will be familiar with this. We're going to put up one of those questions. There we are. So this is the app. Again, take an opportunity to download that. Not least because we want you to participate in some live polling. And we'll actually put up a question in a moment, which will have you submit an answer for, or give an opportunity to submit an answer for, and we'll show you the results. So as you're downloading the app, and then we'll get to this question in a moment, take a moment to do that, because again, we're going to be asking you poll questions throughout the day. I'd like to just take a moment, or several moments, to thank our sponsors as you're doing that, because without our sponsors, this event wouldn't be possible. So thanks again to our gold sponsor, Beijing Changzhou Logistics, CFR Rinkins, CHEP, DSV, Evolution Time Critical, FedEx, ICL, Inform, Priority Freight, Royale International, and Syncrian. Our global sponsors, CNW Courier Network, Confezione Adria Group, Confezione, I can't really speak Italian too well. Visit their booth, they've got some great stuff. Jeffco, silver sponsors, ABP, Automap, Cabca IPS, DHL, eWalls Cargo Care, Goodpack, Macroplastics and Triwall, Peel Ports, ProAct, and Seaports of Niedersachsen. And once again, thanks as well to our inaugural awards launch partners from yesterday. Those were again FedEx and TNT, Jeffco, and Priority Freight. They have stands outside. They have specialist services and equipment and innovations specifically for your sector. So do take some time to visit with our sponsors. So hopefully by now you've all had a chance to download the app. And if you open up the app, there is a tab called Polling. So if you just click on the polling, we will pull up our question, which we'd like to get your response to. We won't share the results with you just yet. We'll give you some time throughout the session to reflect on this or to download the app again if you haven't. So the question is, what will have the biggest impact on European automotive logistics over the next 3 to 5 years? Will it be shifts towards electric vehicle and battery production? Will it be the digitalization of transport processes, delivery documents, contracts, freight booking, etc.? Will it be advances in automation and artificial intelligence? Will it be European transport regulations, whether they're vehicle standard, taxes, tolls, etc., or impacts from Brexit and trade policy? So when you have a chance, sign on there, give us your answer. We'll show at the end of the session how what the room thinks, and again, we'll have more voting like that throughout the day. Okay, so that gives me a chance to move on to our main event. We have two great keynote speakers for you this morning. We'll bring them up one by one, do a bit of short Q&A with each, and then bring the audience together and everyone on stage for a group Q&A session, which I think will be really interesting. Our first speaker is part of McKinsey's automotive and assembly practice and is a leader of the connected car and automotive car initiative for McKinsey. He has deep expertise in automotive and machinery, specializing in connectivity, automation, autonomous driving, Internet of Things, and Industry 4.0. It's my great pleasure to welcome Matthias Kesa, partner from McKinsey. Matthias, the stage is yours. Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for having me. And thank you, Christopher, Louis, and Nimish for inviting me and to speak to you. I kind of tried to make my own story about the topic of the conference today. And I think, Christopher, you did a great introduction in framing that session. I like the picture of the Crossroads. And I thought to myself, is there kind of a way in order to bring them together, right? So is there a way where we can say we use the one big highway that we are still on in automotive, that is our traditional business model where we still make more than 90% of our business on, in order to fuel the other street, which is still probably a street, but we can make it into a highway. So I thought about that and I used your motto of the session, innovation through technology, excellence through digitalization. And my story kind of splits 50-50 into these two and what I thought about it. And let me start with innovation through technology. And when I think about that, I mean, that could be process innovation, right? It could be product innovation, but I started to think about coming from the customer in the end. So let me start on a very high level and bear with me, I will make it logistics specific in the second part of the presentation. Innovation through technology, obviously in the automotive industry, and you think about the product, in terms of product innovation, obviously you come to technology such as ADAS, up to autonomous driving, level 4, level 5. You go to connectivity, connected services. You go to electrification. You could even name that emission regulation. Question of which comes first. And as for solutions, services, shared mobility, and whatever is there. So this is nothing new, right? This is something everybody of us talks about for a couple of years now already. What strikes me, however, is when we look at a couple of the dimensions that go with it, that it accelerates. It still accelerates. This kind of technology-infused product innovation is accelerating, and the business models that go around with it are accelerating as well. A couple of effects that I found in the recent work that I did was, for example, the massive acceleration of investments into these technology, being it capabilities at startups, being it at bigger firms. Also, the acceleration of how many players that are not traditional automotive players are actually entering that space of, I would not call that automotive anymore, I would call it probably mobility. Like 95% of all the investments that go into these technologies come from players that are not the traditional automotive players, like OEMs, suppliers, service providers. And a couple of other facts, transaction volume, supplier industry skyrocketing. I think we will see even more of acquisitions and transactions in the suppliers in the tier 1s and tier 2 world, probably. So there's tremendous acceleration behind it, so it will become even more important, right? So we have talked about it already for a couple of years. I was very happy to be here already 2 years ago, and we talked about that. But really, again, what strikes me is the pace and the speed that comes with it. Now, you could still say, okay, so it's accelerating, but is it relevant? Right? I mean, today, if you ask an OEM, how much do you make with connected services, the number is still close to 0, right? So will it become relevant then, if it's that fast? Now, we try to, so if a consultant tries to work out something, he builds a framework and then he does a 2x2 matrix. So that's exactly what I try to do here. So I try to build a little bit a picture of what is that, what we call ecosystem of mobility industry. Obviously starts around infrastructure now, that's becoming more and more important, especially for autonomous driving. I would say the rather classical supplier, OEMs, producers. And then there are two that are probably rising, which is around providing mobility and managing the customer, so intermediaries, integrators. Now, I just try to make it very simple, and bear with me for a second. I think there is a distinction between how the technology moves, but then also how the business model moves. So how do you monetize on the technology that is actually out there? There might be traditional, disruptive. And when we look at today, so how does this picture look like where the automotive industry makes money today? So where's the revenue per day? Let's have a look at the traditional. This is kind of how we map the revenue pool of the automotive industry today. It's around 2 to 3 trillion actually. 4 is a little bit too high, but it's very much, we have a traditional business model, we sell cars, we do the after sales, we monetize very much on the after sales, obviously in terms of margin. It's a business that is dominated by large mass markets OEMs, a couple of premium OEMs, and then the entire value chain that is behind of it. Now, we did a little bit of role-playing, gaming, talk to all the industry participants and try to figure out, obviously scenario-based, how could 2030 look like? And 2030 could actually look like that. So 2030 looks very much like the new technologies will be the dominant force for the revenue pool in the automotive industry. So there will be, on the business model side, but very much also on the technology side, the revenue will come and monetize on the quadrants that are not so much on the traditional piece. So it's accelerating, and it will become important in the future, right? And then you could ask the question, so if I believe in that, how do I access that? Right? I think everybody of us who try to start using and monetizing on new technologies, we have tremendous questions around where to source it from, where to get the capabilities from, and so on and so forth. So we try to take an analogy and look at investments that are made into these new technologies in the automotive sector. We took and we built a small machine learning algorithm that looked at the investments over the past 8 years into these technologies in the automotive industry. And this is kind of a picture that comes out of it. Every dot is one firm, and there are very much like thousands of very small dots that you can't even see. The size of the dot is how much investment goes into it. And some kind of such a picture comes out of it that maps what are the different underlying technologies and sees what are the linkages between these technologies. Now, the interesting part of that, I agree, though I don't bore you with a lot of these numbers. There's just 2 numbers that I want to draw your attention on. Right? What came out of it is 10 different kind of underlying technology clusters that were identified, but what is even more interesting is what you have on the bottom when you sum everything up. If you compare the 2 bubbles on the bottom there, this is on the right-hand side, from your side, from the left-hand side, this is what were the number, the euro billion number in investments that were made in the 4 years from 2010 to 2014 into these technologies. On the right-hand side, this is the number of investments that were made the 4 years after. So if you multiply that out, this is 6 times more the investments. And it goes the entire amount, or if you average it by investment, it actually tells the same story. So the point of that is these technologies have gotten so expensive that it's very difficult to access them. Right? So we need to find smart ways in order to be able to play there, because we learned earlier that this might become faster and that is actually relevant. So now I stop boring you with numbers. I just come back to my initial story, which is, so innovations to technology, yes, there's a great deal about in the automotive industry. I don't need to tell you, you probably need to know that better than I do. But it comes faster, it will be extremely relevant, and we don't know yet probably how to finance it, right? Because we are not an industry that has margins of 20 or 30% or something like that. So how to do that? How to do that, and there are probably a lot of different answers, right? I just want to tap on one, and that then goes to the second part of the story. That goes to excellence through digitalization. And I want to deep dive into one of the opportunities how to do that, which is artificial intelligence. So there are others, right? But the one that we learned in the past 3 years is extremely valuable, or can be extremely valuable, is artificial intelligence. So namely machine learning, deep learning actually. If I try to explain it to myself, and myself, I'm a mechanical engineer, started out a couple of years working in R&D in automotive. So I need to learn myself a little bit what this technology actually can do. I always try to frame it like it's a technology that for once can actually be dynamic. So it learns itself. Somebody explained it to me very easily is, so far we have worked with data. We had to figure out an algorithm to come to a result. Now this technology enables us to have data, and we know what result we want to have, and based on historic linkages between the two, the algorithm will build itself because it learns itself. So it will learn itself. It can actually process language. It can process images, vision. And then if you combine all of that, there comes robotics, virtual agents, bots, and everything around that. And now what can you do with that? So we tried to actually partner up with Google for half a year and brought that to the CES in January. We tried to figure out what actually does this technology do to the automotive industry. Is it really relevant, or is it a big buzz because the name is very interesting to hear? We looked at very thoroughly at the different processes that an OEM and tier 1 supplier have and mapped that against where could be potential use cases of artificial intelligence. We identified 120 use cases, and the value, and that actually struck me as well, is the value is tremendous of that. I will come to it in a second again to explain a little bit, but if we sum it all up and you take these 120 use cases and you would imagine an OEM would implement all of these use cases until 2025, there's a value of 9 percentage points increase in his EBIT. So if you take the average OEM, this is barely doubling his EBIT. And where does it come from? It comes from processes in research and development. I mean, can you automate claim modeling to struct data, for example? It comes a lot, obviously, from procurement, just because this is the OEM example. A lot of the value in the OEM is still rooted and comes from third parties. It comes a lot from supply chain management. And I will tap on that later a little bit on, because I think this is the interesting part for today. 15% of improvement, bottom line improvement in supply chain management by this technology. It comes from manufacturing, obviously. Sales and marketing, also here there's a top line part to attach to it, not only a bottom line part to attach to it. Same for after sales and services, and support functions where you can use bots, automation, and so on in order to improve processes. So all of that give you, or give an average OEM, a 9 percentage point EBIT improvement. Now, this is obviously a huge number, right? And we had a lot of, at CES we met with 10 OEMs in order to discuss that. What was interesting is none of these OEMs said no to the value. Everybody believes actually in the value. The question is rather, how quickly can I get to it? Because obviously the value that is in there, so the 9 percentage point EBIT improvement, is something that you will not hold, right? You will eventually give it on to the customer because we are in a competitive industry. So the question is, how fast can you attack that? And that is something that we would love, also as McKinsey would love to push and help the industry to very quickly monetize on, because they're very interesting use cases that you can build upon and that you can monetize upon. Let me give you 2 examples. One example is that we are building currently with an OEM is around visual inspection. I mean, machine learning, neural networks are very, very good in recognizing pattern from images if you attach metadata to these images. So one thing could be, for example, leasing cars that come back to a sales dealer, or quality inspection at the end of the line, or actually incoming part inspection. You can automate that with deep learning and neural networks, because the technology looks at the different images and can then actually, based on learning it, can recognize that a bump in the C-pillar of a car has a different impact on the residual value than a bump on the hood of the car, for example. Another case, to make it a little bit more supply chain management specific, could be managing the disruptions within the supply chain and actually predicting disruptions in the supply chain to earlier find solutions for that. And now I'm coming back to the story that I'm actually very happy to be here today on time, because I experienced that myself yesterday when flying here. And I think I wasn't the only one who came from Munich, but our flight actually landed at 1 o'clock, quarter after 1 o'clock a.m. in the morning, right? Which was due to incoming flights being disrupted due to thunderstorms. But if I would known that already at like 7 or 6 p.m. in the evening, earlier yesterday evening, I would have probably taken another means of transport. So there's tremendous value in doing predictive scheduling, trying to predict disruptions, and then earlier be able to respond to that, which I think is super interesting for the supply chain as well. So in total, there is a lot of value by the technology. We are convinced of that, and I think now then the question obviously is, how can I get to that value? It obviously means that you and your fellow co-workers and your companies need to try to find a way to bring that in the company. I'm deeply convinced, based on what we've seen so far, working with a couple of OEMs on pilots, artificial intelligence pilots, specific use cases, that you will only be able to monetize on that value if you transform that and bring that into the company, right? So there's something like 20 years ago when we thought about lean transformation, I think it's the same. So it's something that needs to go into every process, into the heart and the body of every of our coworkers. And then I think it's about having the right capabilities, obviously, in order to do that, which is not so easy, right? And it's something is a kind of a transformation that we went through as well. So you might still know probably the classic McKinsey, which is on the right-hand side, right? So strategy consultants dealing with high numbers, so something like the first part of my presentation. But we went through the same transformation. We built up what we call digital McKinsey, and with a very strong artificial intelligence arm, and build up that capabilities with AI data scientists, with product architects, with designers, in order to help our clients to build up these pilots and learn and build the capabilities around it. And I think this kind of, and I just take it as an example, this kind of transformation is also required then to be able to monetize and to get the value out of artificial intelligence as the second part of that story. So summarizing, that was my story around, I think there's tremendous value in innovation. That can be product innovation, that can be process innovation. And the question how to finance that and how to deal with the investments of getting to that innovation is actually, or could be actually, digitization as well, and could be the excellence that you bring into your companies around digitization and artificial intelligence as an example. I leave you with that story. There will be many other stories that you probably share around or during this day and the next days. And I will hand over to Mr. Schwede then, and I think he will make it even much more specific than for the supply chain context. Thank you so much.
Join us, sit down.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Matthias. Fantastic and very interesting perspectives there. Whilst that's fresh, I want to just ask a couple of questions before we bring on our next speaker. So if you can just join us here for a moment. First of all, we have some red and green cards on the table, so we can do some quick straw polls. And I think it's very interesting to hear about things like artificial intelligence, but let's get a sense of where the audience lies with this sort of technology right now. So green, if your company is currently using artificial intelligence in any way in the supply chain in your operations. Green if you are, red if you're not there yet.
actually should take a picture of that.
Yeah, you should. So now that's a rough account. What would you say, Matthias? Are we about 50-50?
60-40.
60-40 using, 60 against, for it, yeah. Okay.
60 red.
60 red.
60 red, so 40 green.
About 60% not using it, 40% using it. So green if you're researching it and planning sort of use of it in future, and red if you haven't even actually started. So there we're much stronger green. So obviously we're on the way. Okay, well that's interesting to get a sense. Obviously in the supply chain, this is perhaps still more in beta or in sort of testing. I thought we'd just start quickly on some of the good news that you talked about, which is that this can actually improve in the bottom line in these sort of changes. Because right now, in the shifts that we're seeing in the industry, I feel like it's more red ink than green so far.
Yeah.
Mobility services doesn't, although a very a popular word, I'm not sure who's making any money in this sort of shifts in the news. So when do you see the kind of change happening from a bottom line point of view? When can we start to see some of the positive impacts coming into the industry?
So I think there's no, let's say, technology or at least big technology barrier to it. So why we couldn't. So I think it's rather how fast are we able as an industry to build up these capabilities and launch these capabilities? Because these are rare, right? So what I learned is that the leading machine learning scientists in the world come from 3 or 4 universities in the world, and that's it. There's one in Zurich, others in the US, basically, probably 1 or 2 in China. And so the resources are so scarce, and that is also what we learned when we tried to hire for the red part of this McKinsey slide that I showed. When we tried to hire these guys, it's extremely difficult, to access them, and then to draw them into a industry that is probably. There are other industries these guys are very attracted to, which are rather the consumer side and in consumer industries and so on. And then also to make it work our firms and our industry and our companies work in a given and probably rather traditional model. I mean, that goes up to what do you pay somebody like that, right? This is they get offers that you can't match with your right. Just an example with your current payment schemes. So I think this is probably the largest barrier in order to be able to do that. So I think the answer could be building up a network of partners so that you can do that with other firms and rather partner than insource that. But coming back then to your question, so I think you can so in the next 3, 4, 5 years, you would be able to get this bottom line impact. I'm convinced of that. I just think that I talked about a couple of pilots that we are running at the moment at OEMs. I just think that pilots don't do justice to it, right? I think it's rather a holistic AI transformation like we have seen it with lean transformations 1 or 2 decades ago, which is necessary.
Do you think, so we're here, Automotive Logistics Europe, we're looking specifically at Europe. Is Europe going to lead in this area, be a fast follower, actually perhaps trailing behind something, in the US, Silicon Valley, or even China, what we're seeing now happening in China?
Well, so I think, so obviously, if you think about the technology, you think about US and Silicon Valley, where a lot of that is rooted, and you have also a main part about of these universities that I talked about are actually there. And China is picking up extremely fast. So the entire machine learning ecosystem, for example, that Baidu built around, they have a complete development platform that they built around that. Is tremendous. Still, I'm not worried about. I think the Europe as a whole, and especially also where we are today, Germany as well as France, Great Britain. I mean, all of that have been engineering rooted geographies, right? So I don't worry about that we see the value of that technology and that we want to drive that technology. I think that will not be the barrier. I think it's rather the barrier of accessing the right capabilities. And I think there we have there we do not have a big disadvantage in terms of geography. Probably rather the industry and our traditional business model.
We have a question through on the app. Remember that you can put questions through via the app. So the question is, with more players involved, pace of change, and a new focus on platforms, does collaborative advantage now replace competitive advantage in automotive logistics and the supply chain? So is it now more about collaboration than it is actually, or perhaps co-opetition, or however we kind of invent these sorts of words?
I was about to mention the word, exactly. Yeah, and this is difficult, right? And let me come back to the example of ourselves, right? As a consultant, you always tend to tell somebody what you should do, but you don't tell about yourself. We experience the same, right? I mean, traditionally we had also a very stable and traditional business model, right? And that was actually also very much rooted in that we had assets, and our assets are not physical assets, kind of people, right? That are able to do good analytics, right? This is like when I talk to a senior member of our firm that did business like 20 years ago. The business was, we have guys that can do analytics, right? And now we also get disrupted because analytics is not anymore a differentiator, right? Now we have this technology. And by that also we learn to work in cooperations, which is difficult at first, but I think it's super important. And I think cooperation not necessarily means that you need to take your fiercest competitor and now do something with him. I think it's rather to find what are other players that probably weren't part of the industry so far, but are now part of what I always call a mobility ecosystem rather than the automotive industry, and try to see and find what they are doing. So something like our partnership then with Google, for example, was also something that we never did before, but that we now experience is working well, and we are working with many different startups and other players and specialists for the technology, for the different functions. So I think that is it is actually about cooperation, and it's about finding who are players that are probably not even traditional automotive players that I could cooperate in order to learn and try to bring these capabilities in.
Okay, great. Matthias, I'm going to ask you to stick around because I think with our next speaker we'll have, and we'll then open up the floor for questions to both the speakers. But before I bring our next speaker, I want to thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
And your time. Thank
you. Thank you.
Before I introduce our next speaker, I just want to remind you again, we're collecting your votes. So if you can go to the app and remember we have our poll, which is open. So if we can, you see the questions there. So if you haven't downloaded the app or used it yet, go on and answer our question about what you think is going to have the biggest impact on European automotive logistics over the next 3 to 5 years. We'll show you the results at the end of the session. So our next speaker heads the Information Logistics and Decision Support System Department at Fraunhofer Institute for Material Flow and Logistics, where he's worked for the past 10, 11 years on a variety of applied science and business consultancy projects. Christian Swede, who's the head of the department, specializes in automotive and information systems for logistics. He has a wealth of experience working with global players in different sectors, and it's a great chance now to talk a bit more in depth about some technology and logistics in automotive logistics. So without further ado, Christian, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, and Christopher, for inviting me to the conference again. I think I was here 2 years also ago. So I was asked to give a short view into the future of automotive logistics. So as you might know, Fraunhofer is Europe's biggest society of applied science. And the Fraunhofer IML in Dortmund, with 500 people working around, researching around logistics, is dealing actually with the topic, what does logistics future look like? And we are working a lot together with automotive industry to just get pictures of it. So, as you can imagine, and as Matthias said, we can talk about future, not talking about digitization. And I always like to introduce the topic of digitization a bit with a different point of view from another scientific discipline. So these are sociologists that say Well, digitization is not just one thing that happens like lean or whatever happened in the past, but it is actually something that has a very rather strong impact on our human society as a whole. So they say it actually has such a strong impact and had speaking, writing and printing on our society, and imagine what has changed. So we had the tribal society, the antique high culture, the modern society that we are living in right now, and this is on the verge of change. And now we will come up to something that is called next society, or they call next society, because actually you can't describe the future, but they say it's about real-time worldwide information interchange about anything. And if you heard the term Internet of Things in the last year, this is basically it. So it's Internet of Things and people interconnecting in real time. And when you look back to the invention of speaking, then, well, this was also a communication technology, but rather local. Now we have actually a worldwide scale, and this will change a lot, and is changing right now a lot what we are doing. So I think you using the apps, and maybe there are also some people not attending the conference on the other end of the world that are voting or looking at the conference. So this is something new, and this will change our way of living even more in the future. So what we did is we had a look of how digitization and this whole development will change logistics and what we are dealing with from day-to-day business. And we came up with these 6 basic pictures that you see here in the circles. And then in the middle, our basic vision, that is a social networked industry, which I will talk about at the end. As you can see, we also had a view on the customer, human beings and their global responsibilities. We had looks into how intralogistics, production logistics works, and then we also had a look on supply chains and transformation of supply chains. And I want to discuss a couple of these pictures with you to come then again to the central picture and central vision of the future. So let's start with the customer. I think Matthias already mentioned is the acceleration, and we believe from Fraunhofer as well that we will see increasing individualization of customer behavior, at least in the Western world, increasing more and more, and also the topic of shorter delivery time that is accepted or at least wished. So we will have and become complexity from this side. On the other side, we believe that customer decisions will be based on footprints, ecological footprints, social footprints. So we see this right now that I think especially in Europe, we see this kind of responsibility. I want to buy something that was produced good, that does not affect the environment, etc. And actually, if you look in the past, I talked with a French scientist a couple of weeks ago, and he says, yeah, back in the 80s, we thought the European market will be swarmed by US meat, etc., sheep meat. And this is maybe compared to what happens now with Google and Facebook, etc. And he said, but in the end, I think a European model was, okay, take responsibility, go eco, etc. And right now it's becoming very famous and very popular, and I think it's even swapping again over the ocean back to the US. And if you think about it, maybe this can also happen with the whole Facebook thing in the end. Let's see what comes up. So this is something, and if you think about this transparency, though, that the customer comes into the shop, scans a barcode, and then gets all the information of the product, who will provide this? This logistic has to provide it, because we are connecting all these partners in the end. We have to connect also in the end the information behind it. So this is one important task for us. What's also interesting, I think, it's not only the sharing economy, we heard about mobility services, but also democratic, decentralized approaches from customer side. So if you think about blockchain, maybe platform economy that is now so famous and so successful from a customer point of view is just something that will pass. Because a customer doesn't want somebody in the middle that collects data, etc. You just want to be connected to demand. Think about Airbnb, for example. You don't need a platform in the middle, you just need clients that are connected to each other. So blockchain could be also a game changer for this kind of business model. It will be interesting if the customer needs actually meet them, or if, let's say, the IT providers search for other ways. So this is the customer driving us, and I think we all have noticed is the acceleration, the disruptions. We heard the flight story, and I think you all notice with all the political changes in the world, supply chains, especially automotive supply chain, get disrupted, and we have a problem to produce these individual cars that we want to produce in a very stable manner. Meaning, we have to get to systems that are far more adaptable and far more flexible than before. And this picture might sound a bit cryptical, but I will explain actually during the whole presentation what we mean with this. Cellular logistics means that our logistics is organized in cells, autonomous cells that communicate with each other. And such a cell can be a human worker, it can be a robot, it can even be a computer program, an AI program that is controlling something. And these cells are interconnecting, and by interconnecting themselves and with the information in real time, they can react very flexible on new situations and adapt themselves. And this is all, as you can see in the name, this is motivated by nature. So nature hasn't created a lot of hierarchy systems actually to react on the whole changing circumstances. Nature did this decentralized, and we believe that in this decentralized approaches we can actually cope with the difficulties we get right now. And maybe just to have a mind experiment what such a thing could look like. If you want to produce a car, maybe in an autonomous world with cells, the one that has an interest, or the unit that has an interest in producing the car is the order, the customer order. Yeah? There it's described, the price, when he wants the car, what items he has. And then the order goes forward digitally and negotiates with resources so that the car can be built and in the end maybe also delivered. So we asked maybe an AGV, please transport my chassis to the next station. Then he negotiates with a robot and the robot says, okay, I can install you this kind of wheel. And there's also a human worker that say, okay, I'm going forward in this. And with this kind of negotiation, you get very flexible and decentralized approaches that can react on anything. If something is missing, you choose another way, etc. So this is a bit like the vision behind it, and actually it's also the vision behind Industry 4.0 that we had discussed here in Germany for the last years, and actually it's rather right now a worldwide movement, and you can find in all the countries some initiatives around it. As you can see on the right side, adaptability and autonomous reaction in the question. So this is actually the main goal of Industry 4.0. We want to get adaptable systems based on autonomy. And how do we get there? This is from the National Academy of Science and Engineering of Germany, AKTech. And they defined different maturity levels on the way to Industry 4.0. They say, okay, computerization and connectivity, this is the old industry. We need this. You have to put a computer in your plant and you have to connect them. But Industry 4.0 starts with visibility. So it starts with, you know what's going on. You have the data, you have the digital twin of your company. This is basically it. And then the next step would be transparency. So you have a look at your data and you can understand why something is happening. We are talking about big data analytics, pattern recognition. So something goes wrong, why did it go wrong? Do I get it? Did it go wrong? Can it go better? Next step would be predictability. So I look into the future. This is AI. I try to find pattern, I try to find them into the future and transfer them into the future. But this could also be online simulation used on the digital twin data. And then the final goal, use all these technologies actually to make your system adaptable, to make it automated but autonomous. And I wanted to show you some examples that I showed you 2 years ago, maybe a bit show you some advances in this. So this is actually the classic assembly line of car makers. You know them, very efficient, a lot of workstations, deeply coupled. You produce a car in a very short time there. You have to install the parts in the different workstations. Efficient but very rigid. So if something happens, if a part is not there in the right time, or if some station gets problems, then you have normally the option to stop the line, or you go into rework at the end of the station. And this is actually what happens more and more in the automotive industry. So we have quotas of 40% rework in the automotive industry. So we have a very efficient system, but in the end, we are doing a lot of the work outside of this efficient system with manual firefighting, because we have to react on the changes of the world. But these disruptions are not part of the system. So the system is not made for disruption. It's just made for working perfect with the plan you made. So we had a rather great and big research project with Volkswagen, Continental, etc. And we were thinking about how can we reorganize this. And we said, okay, we take out this rigid line and we put different production aisles on the surface and we connect them by AGVs that pass from one station to another, and they can decide freely by communicating with each other where is capacity, where are the parts, etc., and then come up with a very flexible environment. And you can see it a bit more technically. You have on the left side, you have the AGV with the chassis, and the AGV is then communicating with the different workstation, knows its path, communicating with the stock, and then knowing, okay, everything is there, I can choose this workstation right now, and if the part is not there, then I choose another workstation. And now in this system, as you can see, the disruption of parts are not there. A workstation gets down, is actually integrated in the system. So you won't stop other cars from being produced. You even won't stop your own car if a part is missing. You can go on and produce this. As you can see, you lose efficiency because you get larger ways, transport ways there. But you only lose efficiency if you think about a non-disruptive system. If you think about the disruptive system where you have a lot of rework in the end, then obviously you gain here efficiency in the end. So what do? We performed a demonstrator that you can see here with some little toy cars from Volkswagen on these AGVs in our laboratories. The visitor can configure their cars, so they can just choose, like in the real world in a tablet, what options do they want, what chassis do they want. Then we put the chassis on the AGV, and then the AGV starts communicating with the workstations. And as you can see here, our students, they have a tablet, and then they know what 3D printed parts they have to install there, so there are some variants. The same AGVs also can go into the rack behind and take out some individual parts and bring them to the line. And as you can imagine, since the visitor don't have to pay for their car, they always choose like the Porsche with the sportive items there. And so we had a lot of individual parts that had to be transported. You see it here down. Up there you see also a robot collaboration, so like an installment of a seat in this little car. And what was actually remarkable that such a system could be demonstrated within the limited resources of such a research project. So we could show it's working. Firstly. Secondly, we could show that visibility, and you see this on the right bottom, was gained out of the system because all the information the system needed only had to be displayed for the human. So you know in every second what the car do, what the AGV does, and which direction it takes, even though you can't predict it because they decided very decentrally and locally. So you can't actually predict it and know, okay, what will be the next step of the car. And thirdly, which was very interesting, it was a very robust system. So after the presentation, 30 people went on the shop floor making photos, putting camera on the robots and whatever, but the system didn't stop. So maybe an AGV stopped because there was somebody in the way or something, but in the end, everything was working. So with this decentralized approach, the cells keep working, and so the whole system keeps working. Even though, as you can imagine, a research project, it was finished at midnight the night before. So it was not, let's say, the most mature system that we had there. Yeah, what's now interesting, and even for us it was interesting, because when I presented this 2 years ago, I think the comments in the industry were more like, oh, yeah, okay, don't kill Henry Ford, and where will we go with this? What is interesting, actually, and also for us in the speed that the automotive industry right now is actually thinking in this direction. So we see the Audi R8 there on the AGV. It's still passing through the line. Okay, in the end, the line is a special case of our scenario if you put the aisles in a certain line. But it's the first step to go there. And also, as far as I know, Audi is financing and working together with a startup with about 30 people, thinking about algorithms to do it efficiently, thinking about simulation. And this is something we also are investigating right now. To simulate such systems, because they are not so easy. They're very complex, and you have to get some understanding about this. And what we also see is here, back down, this is BMW, an AGV that we constructed. AGV are entering, and actually autonomously, freely navigating AGVs are entering the plants. So Volkswagen also in Wolfsburg is wanting to put a lot of AGVs to feed the lines there. So the things are happening, and they happen right now. and faster than we believed, actually. Yeah, now the question to go into the supply chain. What happens if this autonomous thing, this car, goes into the supply chain and has to be transported to the customer? Now, in the end, you can say it meets other legal entities, transport providers or harbor authorities or whatever. And then there is an interesting question about contracts, and there's also an interesting question about how do I finance these kinds of things. And here we are talking a lot about blockchain and smart contracts. So basic research question, now we are actually looking at research. That is a bit far ahead. Can such things make a contract? And we are working with legal professors, and they actually say, well, this is a very interesting question because things can't make a contract. We have frame contracts, and you know this from stock markets that computers make trading, but this is actually very easy because, okay, you go for it or you don't go for it. But these kinds of contracts are very complex, and they have special conditions, they have payment terms, etc., etc. So can we negotiate these kinds of contracts? In the end, can a computer negotiate a contract? Can we make contract in such a way that a computer can read it, can understand it, and can negotiate it? And if we can do this, I think we can also solve a lot of problems nowadays that we have in the supply chain, if you know about bill checking and etc. I think I know in Wolfsburg a lot of people working on this kind of checking bills from suppliers and providers, etc. And then actually it's interesting to know what strategy would be interesting in such a world. Would it be a good strategy to only go for the best price, or would there be better strategy to be a bit more collaborative, etc.? So this is actually game theory applied. I think a lot of researchers would be very happy to research in this kind of field. And for us also it's interesting, I think for you too, under what circumstances could such a system work? In the end it would be very flexible and very autonomous. So, let's not forget the human. I talked a lot about robots, autonomous things, algorithms, but in the end, all the digital world that we are creating behind cannot be seen by humans, so we need to integrate the human with interfaces into this world. So we have to make him able to see what's happening there. And this is not a problem for the future, this is already a problem nowadays and has been a problem since ever we put algorithms into our plants. So this is a very important factor. And there are several ways, and we are investing several ways to do it. Obviously, and the best option right now to think about would be augmented reality if we at least get the technology hardware that works. Algorithms work, as you can see here, we have combined a packing scheme where you have an optimal packing for a box with an AR algorithm, and then you get shown where you have to put the different boxes. You don't need barcodes because you recognize everything with pattern recognition, also AR algorithms, and then you put them in the different boxes. But with AR, you can obviously think about displaying everything that is happening in the digital world to the human worker. When you combine it maybe with sounds and chatbots, then you have a whole information transparency. So we are waiting actually for, I think the whole industry is waiting for technology and some technology providers to actually do some industry-proven hardware that can be used on the shop floor. So please, if there are some technology providers, go for it. Actually, this is a problem because we work with a lot of technology providers and they have other product cycle times. So we talk with some German people and they say, oh no, we have product cycle times of 7 years. And I say, guys, you can't develop 7 years on such new technology. You will have 3 new technologies on the way. You have to be fast there. So this is something I think we are waiting for. Another thing is obviously training. This is something we do also together with customers. This is Picnic, virtual training environment, as you can see here with a green screen. People are working in virtual environment, learning the processes. We also apply some game concepts, so gamification, where you get points, you compete against each other and get motivated by these kinds of training. And you can actually also, not only for people who start new in your company, but also if you have standard processes, new SAP or whatever, and you want to spread it out in the world in all your plants, then it's maybe easier to do it on a virtual way than you go there with your experts and explain anything. And this is actually, I think, something a lot of companies right now are going for. Yeah, and last but not least, this is an application for planning. So imagine the guy on the left side here standing in a warehouse, and he's applying virtual components into the warehouse. He's replanning the warehouse. So he puts here some racks, and there are some forklifts, and maybe he puts also the processes, how they move together. And on the other half of the world, you have maybe the experts in a virtual environment, and they get connected in real time, and they see everything in a virtual environment, and they can interact, and they can say, okay, no, that's a bad place, let's put it like here. And they are creating together the digital twin in the end, because they are creating the warehouse planning. And you can use the same model then for training, for example, for simulation or whatever. And I think this is also some German OEMs are working in a smaller scale on these kind of things. So we believe that the future vision is not a vision where we don't see any human workers on the shop floor. So maybe this is some vision for, I don't know what, in 100 years, but on the short term, we see a so-called social networked industry where humans and autonomous things, so that may be robots, that may be AGVs, but that may also be algorithms, work together hand in hand in a very flexible way. And as you can imagine, the autonomous things are here for the standard things to do, the standard tasks. And humans, they can always do the special tasks, the tasks where you need creativity, where you need your flexibility that we as humans have. The exceptions to handle them, etc. So there's always this kind of combination. And I think if you all know about automatization, it's very difficult to 100% automate a fabric. You always have these exceptions, and the humans are a very important part. When we talk about this scenario, and this is right now what we do in the Institute, it's not sufficient to only let engineers and computer scientists think about these kinds of things. Because we define here some new rules, also how humans and robots in the future work together. So we actually we group up with sociologists from the work science, but also with psychologists, etc. So investigating how these rules think, and this can't stop in our institute. It must actually, in the end, be a society thing to discuss. Yeah, let me, with my last slide, put some things to actually discuss. Maybe. I think also a crossroad here, maybe another one than presented earlier. So on the left side, you see another Fraunhofer Institute that we have a good collaboration between human and robot working together. On the right side, you see maybe from the first industrial revolution in England, the Luddites that are destroying the machines because they were very afraid of them. So I think we have to do the whole thing right. This is the message. I don't want to put like a scenario of menace or whatever. There's a lot to gain here, but I think we have to do it right, and we have to take the people with us. So first of all, I think we have seen autonomous robots enter the shop floor, so we have to think right now about how we work together with these kinds of things. And I think some of you OEMs at least are thinking about it. How do I integrate these AGVs in my fabrics? How do I work together with the people that are working there? And I think we have to think about also that autonomous behavior of algorithms and of robots is something new. This is not another tool that we get. So it's not a crowbar or whatever that we get in our plants. They are taking decisions, and this is something new, and we have to participate our employees in this process. You know, they have to participate, have to decide how do we want to work with it, who has the last word in the end. I think there are important discussions to be made, and it can't be decided by the computer science who programs the robot in the end, because he will do it, but because he has to do it, but he needs, I think, some frame rules. Certainly, and I think this is very important, digitization by itself doesn't create transparency. Firstly, if you take decisions, you put them in a deep learning neural network, you get a big black box, and you don't know what's happening there. You get the result in the end. So this is not transparency about. And this is also true for a lot of, if you think about a lot of SAP production planning systems that we are using right now also. So I think we have to create the IT system in such a way that we actually understand what they are doing. And there are matters, but we have to take money in the hands to do this in the end, not to lose control. I think it's important. At the universities, we now have research areas. They try to find out how a neural network works that has learned something. What is it? What happens in it? How does it make decisions? A very important factor. Yeah, and in the end, I think we all know it, some jobs will disappear. Standard jobs will disappear. We have to focus on enforcement of digital abilities of our employees. By formation, we have to take them with us. And I had a very interesting discussion also near Wolfsburg at the beginning of this year. And at this point, there was a comment, and the guy was saying, okay, I have guys that are driving forklifts for 35 years. They can't do anything else. And I was saying, well, how can it be that the most flexible being that this planet has created, we can go from the Sahara to the North Pole, even to the moon. You put them in such conditions that after 35 years working for you, you can do nothing else but driving a forklift. So we have done something very wrong. So I would say we have to change also the way how people work in our companies. We have to live that we are changing our ways permanently, and we have to live this. I'm looking forward for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Please join us. Join us in the hot seat over here, as I call it. First of all, doesn't it look great to work in research? You get to sort of build toy Porsches, you have junk food in boxes you play with all day, you have video games, game theory. No, actually, I think those examples, and it's not just that it's fun for researchers, they're happening in the supply chain. And like you pointed and made that point, that there is a reality to that, obviously, on the shop floor. And as I said in the beginning, what an exciting time, actually, to work in this industry. And I think you hit on such an important point there. The forklift driver, I mean, is certainly, I mean, the knowledge that he or she has built up over that time certainly has a role to play, not least in some of these new technologies and systems and building the IT around that. So thank you for that insight. What I wanted to start with, Christian, before we open up some questions to the floor, obviously, many OEMs in this room would probably look at some of these things and say, this all looks great, it's fantastic, but my IT system is a legacy system from 35 years ago, and we have so many add-ons and bolt-ons, it's so complicated, to even get some of this going can be quite a challenge. So do you see that as a barrier, the sort of legacy enterprise systems, and what are some ways that the industry can be more flexible? Because I don't think we can just wipe them away either.
No, I think, that's a big barrier. It's not only for the big ones, but also for the small ones. I think we see right now a change also from the IT side, that the ERP guys are opening up. Even SAP is opening up since a couple of years. So there is a change, but we still are stuck with some of the old systems that are very closed. We don't get the data goodly out of it. And I think what we see, what the big companies do is actually they build their own digital twins. So they have now understood that data is one of the most important things they have, and they have to build them themselves. They have to have the control, and then they take the data out of the legacy system and put them in. It's a lot of work. You have to do it. You can't do it another way around. For the smaller ones, I would say a lot of them didn't invest a lot of money into IT in the last years. We are working with very small companies where you have, I have a SAP system, but I didn't update it for 10 years, and I was like, okay, if you don't invest into IT, it's getting difficult. But if they now choose a new one, then I would put as a general term and condition that everybody has access to the data, let's say everybody in the company, and if you want to have new projects, new algorithms apply to, you have to have access to your data, so the data has to be yours and not the IT company's one and whatever. So I think there are barriers, but we are learning right now.
Is part of the barrier, and you touched on this, but is some of those barriers also mindset in terms of do all the experience we have on the shop floor, how do we get them to stop worrying and trust the algorithm, so to speak? Is there resistance that to kind of seeing and understanding that this actually, frankly, can do it better than some of us? And I mean, there's a way to go back and forth on that, but is that hope standing in the way as well?
Yeah, I think this is one of the points, but it's actually it's not a new thing with AI. It was there before, but I think with AI it gets even bigger because we get a bigger black box in the end. So. As I said, I think it's very important that we do it together with the people and that we made the programs explain themselves. I think this is not only important in the business section, but even as a private person, we want to know what algorithms do and decide for us. So I think we have to do a lot of work there, and this is actually something you can do right now. Some things I think that there are work for researchers, etc., to come up with some new ideas there.
Fantastic. I want to open it up to the floor for either of our panelists. If anybody has any questions, we have some roving mics. You can just put your name up. Do we have any questions from the floor? I can keep going. I mean, I'm not going to. We're running a little bit over, but we'll keep. I want to kind of keep some Q&A discussion going for a little bit before you move to coffee. I want to ask for both of our panelists actually. So I mean, one of the things we hear the most about now is blockchain. If we were to sort of put it on the sort of hype scale, it must be. I mean, I don't know if it's a peak hype or what. So for automotive, from a perspective of the automotive industry, specifically for supply chain, but perhaps not only, because we know it's not only for supply chain. How important will blockchain be over the coming years? Is it being a little overhyped right now, or is it genuinely going to be as important as all the chatter? Maybe Matthias, we can start with you.
Well, I think it's a little bit. I mean, 2 years ago we had one headline that was demystifying artificial intelligence. I think it's a little bit the same, right? These are technologies that are valuable or have tremendous value for the automotive industry. I think goes for blockchain actually. Yes, probably there's a little bit hype around it, but I think everybody in the automotive industry is very much. I mean, most of ours are kind of engineers or rooted in understanding what technologies do. I think we all very quickly understand, so what is the technology for, where can it help, and where it also can't help. The same goes with artificial intelligence, right? Machine learning can't solve every problem that we have. It can solve very specific problems, for example, around picture recognition, visual recognition, language recognition, and so on. I think same goes for blockchain.
Yeah. I would say it's always the step between what can we do right now with the technology, as you said, specific problems, especially with blockchain, they are actually good for some cases, and for other cases you can use them, but you could have used other things years ago. I think it's good when for supply chain collaboration and data interchange, we use the blockchain because we do it then. We could have done it other ways, the same secure manner, whatever, but now we can do it with blockchain, so if the people do it, perfect. But on the other hand, I think we have this game-changing thing that is more in the visionary part, where we say, okay, AI is something new, this will change. We don't know when there will be this explosion, but it will come. And I think blockchain, with this approach of decentralized information interchange, also has the potential to do something there with business models and disrupting it. And we will see. I think that's not the use cases right now we are looking for, but there will happen something in the future.
We have a question on the app, which I think is quite a good one. So with the potential for redundancies, so job losses, will manufacturers and indeed governments support initiatives, and will this be different? This is an interesting aspect. Will it be different in lower cost geographies compared to higher cost ones like Europe? So again, will governments get behind? So do you see perhaps resistance from governments perhaps standing in the way of some of this? Will there have to be different solutions? Maybe universal income, I suppose, would be something that's even Elon Musk of the world are already talking about. And again, maybe the differences that might arise in geographies around that.
First of all, let's say from a German perspective, I miss a political discussion about this. There is none.
Yeah.
So there are conferences dealing with these kind of things, but in the public, we don't have any discussion. It's always, technology is great, everything is good, we are evolving, we are growing, etc., etc. So a part is missed there. So I think we have to discuss about these kind of things and seriously discuss on a governmental level, discuss openly. And as I always say, I think there is a working party in Germany that might take a topic of the future of work, but they don't. So there is an open space for something. And I think a lot of people would be interested to hear something about it, and it's important. And it's the same thing actually in discussing how do we work together with robots, etc. There is few discussion in politics. There is some discussion in some areas where there's happening something, and we need political solutions, because in the end I'm asked always when you present these robots, etc. And what about the people? And mustn't you be blamed to develop such things? And I say, well, okay, we are developing these things and they will be used. And the thing is not for an engineer to solve, it's to solve. The society has to solve something there. And I'm missing this discussion actually. And I would be open also to discuss it with other disciplines, with politics, to get them a bit understand the technology, and then they can put the big picture around it. I think this is important.
Yeah. I very much agree. I think there are two periods, right? There's now a transition period, and for that I fully agree. I think there needs to be discussion from politics, but also from the employers, right? So you need to find ways for your employees to adapt, to work with this technology, and also to find trust in that technology, and find ways how this co-location of human capabilities and technology capabilities go together. Ultimately, then I would say like probably after our life, but ultimately in this greater scheme of things, I'm not so worried, right? So I don't like these discussions that say like 80% of the jobs will be redundant. Well, in a theoretical model, yes, but it's a little bit like the analogy that you brought earlier, right? When humankind invented speech, right? I mean, and then later the written word and then printing. I mean, that were the same kind of transformations, and there were new jobs or new kind of ways to work or do something. I actually just asked 2 weeks ago a friend of mine who works in machine learning in the Silicon Valley, and I asked him, I mean, what do you, given that you are one of these guys who really understand what this technology is about and which advice do you give to your kids, which job to take, what to study, and so on and so forth. And he said, and that goes apparently for a lot of these guys over there, for a lot of the families over there, he said they go into social jobs after all. They do not learn like I learned mechanical engineering or so, which was, right, I wanted to go into automotive, so there was mechanical engineering, right, nothing else. So I think there will be a transition. There will be new kinds of ways, what to do, how to work, how to earn money, and so on and so forth. So in the greater scheme of things, I'm not worried at all. But I agree, there's a transition period that we need to manage.
Transition, that's the point. Huh?
Okay. So hopefully good news for people in this room then as well. Any last questions from the audience, or I suppose first questions? Before we sort of wrap up? Well, I'll take that as a sign that you're starting to crave some coffee. Before I sort of reveal the results of our poll and stuff, I want to thank Matthias and Christian. Fascinating presentations, great discussion, and a great start to our event. So thank you both. Thank you. So you recall we've had our poll running throughout. So we'll give you a last chance for anybody who hasn't. Please open up the app and download, answer the question. Again, just quickly, what will have the biggest impact on European automotive logistics over the next 3 to 5 years? Will it be shifts towards EVs and electric batteries? Will it be digitalization of transport processes? Will it be advances in automation and artificial intelligence? Changes in European transport regulation, or trade policy such as Brexit? So hopefully most of you have had an opportunity to vote. If you haven't, please do so now. And we will momentarily reveal the results. So, it's not a runaway winner, but it's sort of by some margin. In the next 3 to 5 years, it's digitalization of transport processes, followed by EV and batteries. So I think that's perhaps a sign of kind of our little straw poll. AI perhaps not really there yet for most people in this room, but there's still a lot of efficiencies to gain, whether this is in getting rid of paper documents, in automating more aspects around freight booking, invoicing. So a lot of change can come in digitalizing, let's say, today's processes We're going to see definitely some changes in terms of EV and battery production, and about 20% of you see automation and AI as playing a driving role. Transport regulations down at the bottom, and trade also down at the bottom. So an interesting. We had a great response there. I know most of you voted. Indeed, as I think Christian alluded to, this session is being streamed live on our website. So we've had some participation from outside the room as well. So we're gonna have coffee now, but then, as I mentioned at the beginning, when we come back together at around 11. We'll have another session here in the main room, and there's 3 different ideas labs happening out in the other room. So on the far left of so if you go through the exhibition area and move through, there's a room talking about rethinking finished vehicle logistics. And then if you go back towards registration, there are 2 more ideas labs there. So it's all signed out there. So you can choose the ideas lab, or in this room, we've got a great session on unlocking potential in the supply chain. So you have a lot of different things to choose from. Take advantage. We look forward to seeing you throughout the day. Thanks again.